Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility. Welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Jillian Kubik, your host for today's episode, and I'm joined by Ann and a special guest. Before we introduce him, how are you doing today, Ann?
I'm doing great. Glad to be with you.
Yes, it's always a joy to be with you and to chat with you. Today we have a dear friend of yours, Ann, and a dear friend of Springs in the Desert, Chris O'Neill. Chris, I hope that you're doing well today. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about you from you. Our guests really are so special to us, and our community loves to hear from them. So would you just mind telling us a little bit about yourself and where you're at in the world and what position you hold?
Yeah, well, first, I'm just really grateful for the invitation to come and be part of this. It's just really something that's close to my heart, and which I guess that will become clearer as this goes on. But so I'm Chris O'Neill. I'm currently the director of the Office of Marriage and Family Life in the Archdiocese of New Orleans under Archbishop Amond, and I've been in this position for about 3 years as the director, and then for about 4 or 5 years before that, I worked as an associate here and I did a few other things. And Ann and I have been friends for a long time. We went to school together. We were at the John Paul II Institute. We were in the class of 2005 together. And then Kimberly was a year behind us, I think. She might have been 2 years. I can't remember, but we were in school together with Kimberly. And so it was a time of incredible intellectual and spiritual formation for all of us. We had a shared conversation about the nature of the human person, the fruitful union of husband and wife, male and female, all of those kinds of things. And then this is before Ann met Keith. And then Ann met Keith and they got married. And then the struggles with infertility were cropping up. And that sparked a conversation pretty informally at first, but it was pretty vigorous among Ann, Kimberly, a couple of others, and they would reach out to me occasionally, and I would kind of chime in with my thoughts. And then eventually the article that was in Humanum came out, and then that's when Springs in the Desert got its name and kind of got started and all that whole history. So I've been there. I've been around the development of Springs really from the beginning, sort of in the background and supporting them and encouraging them and kind of watching and paying attention. And then when I got into the captain's chair as the director of the office, it was the first thing that came to mind. Like, we need to get Springs. We need to be doing something with Springs here in the Archdiocese. And so we reached out and kind of got the ball rolling there. So yeah, that's my involvement with Springs in the Desert, my friendship with Ann and Kimberly, and kind of where I've been and what I'm doing now. And, I guess we can talk more about why, from the diocesan perspective, why that's important and, what I'm trying to do. But let's start there, and then I'll let you ask questions.
Yeah, I really appreciate, I think, just the way that you explained your connection to Springs in the Desert, because it started with a friendship. And I think that is really what a lot of people in this community are desiring is a deeper community friendship with people who can relate on some sort of level. It might be that they're experiencing the same thing. Maybe it's because they understand their body, the human person, in a way that is deeper than perhaps what the secular world, sees at surface level. Yeah, so I really appreciate that communal.
I think that's the most important thing about Springs, actually, and it's worth saying right at the beginning, is that it's grounded in friendship. And that sense of friendship is very deep. And the idea of fruitfulness in marriage needs to be understood in a broader and richer and deeper way than just, my ability to have children or something like that. And so to me, that's like the main insight, is to make more visible the significance of friendship and the significance of fruitfulness in relationship that's big enough to include children, not the other way around, right? It's big enough. Friendship is big enough and deep enough and significant enough. It's so significant that, in fact, it's capable of welcoming children. But, if children don't arrive, that doesn't undermine what's really at stake in friendship. And that's been very much part of my intellectual and our shared intellectual and spiritual formation, and then just also our experience of one another. So yeah, that's my favorite thing about Springs, is that it's so focused on that dimension of friendship.
Yeah, and I just want to mention something too, because Chris mentioned that after graduation, I had not yet met Keith. In fact, I went right into diocesan work at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, went right into marriage prep, me as a single woman, but coming freshly off this amazingly rich formation in marriage and family studies. And so had the opportunity to work with Chris as we invited him to come to Philadelphia a number of times to help us with our marriage prep that we were sort of creating from scratch and coming and doing marriage prep retreats. And at that time, where I was just personally, and we can talk a little bit about what it's like in diocesan office where you don't have a ton of resources and there are so many pressing things, marriage prep being probably the number one. The subject of infertility was not even at all on my radar. Of course, we had an NFP coordinator. We offered NFP classes. We spoke about it in our marriage prep program. But yeah, this idea that maybe things might not work the way that we expect never even entered my mind until I got married. And then we had the difficulty that we did. And so I think that time spent with working together with Chris on marriage prep and talking through things, was so good once we got to this point. And now I'm shifting the focus. I'm out of the archdiocesan structure. I'm moving into ministry. Chris is moving into that structure. And now it's just so extraordinary that he wants this to be a part of what they're doing there in the Archdiocese of New Orleans, because it's not something that is happening everywhere. But hopefully, by the end of this podcast, we can see that even with threadbare resources, right, it's still possible to do this kind of work, and it's really important, and it's an essential pastoral element of the work of a diocese.
I should say you reminded me of, going back to the beginning there, so part of my part of our story, my wife and I, we had two miscarriages before entered the institute. And, in some ways, the us not having children as soon as we wanted to actually opened up the opportunity for me to go to school. And so, which is kind of it's always that thing, it's like, well, sometimes, if I had children the way I wanted to, I wouldn't have met Anne. I wouldn't be part of this whole thing. But also carrying that suffering through my schooling, it was always sort of in the background of my mind, as I was thinking about the theology of marriage, all of these things that we're studying at a pretty high academic level. I was sort of ahead of Anne in terms of the personal experience of that. And so I think that that's part of why there was a connection to because I was thinking about things like infertility, miscarriage, all that kind of stuff while I was going through the school. So that was sort of already an operative question in me. That just kind of made for a fertile ground for the conversation to go forward. And so for me to play the role that I was able to play so far and continue to be able to play for Springs. And so it's a fruit of my own suffering, of my own family life that has allowed this to go the way it has. And then it's expanded considerably from there, my understanding and my what I'm trying to do in the diocese from there. But that was an important element. And then the funny thing was, Anne said you invited me to Philadelphia, but I think the truth was I kind of invited myself. I was in the PhD program and completely broke, and Anne and her boss were in DC for a conference, and I just walked up to them and I said, "Y'all have to hire me to do something because I'm dying over here." And so they were like, "Okay, come work with us," So that's kind of how that happened. And that was incredible work in Philadelphia that we were doing. These were so important and formative, and it mostly in marriage preparation. But that's also an element. We don't need to go into too much detail there, but that was also an incredibly important and formative time of trying to bring the thought that the church has developed over the centuries into the pastoral world of the here and now and talking to actual people. And so that's all in the background. So that's it's been a really privilege there. So
I think that sets just a beautiful stage too for anyone who's in a diocesan position, that there are several ways that the cross of infertility can be pertinent to them. It could be because of a friendship, it could be because of personal experience, it could be because of a colleague, that it doesn't there are ways, as you just shared, that you can enter into this and provide resources to help those who are in your diocese. And so I'd kind of like to move there, Chris, to hear a little bit about what you are doing in the Diocese of New Orleans, what you have done, and maybe kind of what some of those fruits have been in your diocese by providing some resources and advocating for those with infertility. Hey friends, it is your podcast host, Jillian. Just popping into this episode to ask you to consider supporting our podcast with a financial gift. This episode is brought to you by staff, volunteers who reviewed the content, and a professional editor. We would be so grateful for your financial support to keep this podcast sounding great and reaching more listeners who need a friend on the path of infertility. Thank you for your support.
Well, let me just begin with the practical part, and then I'll put the thought behind it first. So I knew we wanted to reach out to face this issue of infertility, and I knew that we weren't doing it. Like we just weren't. Like there was nothing in our diocesan structures, at least on the archdiocesan level, where we were, even engaging this question at all. And I felt pretty strongly because of my own experience and my formation, all the stuff that we talked about before, that because we weren't engaging in that work, it was leaving our own reflection in all of the areas of marriage and family life, natural family planning and, abortion and marriage preparation and all of the things that we do, marriage enrichment, all of those things we do. The dimension of fertility and fruitfulness was always just way too shallow for me. Like it's just like it's not sufficient. Big Catholic families don't contracept, babies are great, and that's all there is to say about it. And there's reasons why people are, say, contracepting, for example, or using reproductive technologies, or there are deep human desires of the heart. There are deep issues that are going on in people's lives. And all we have to say is don't do bad things and be sure to do good things. And that's that. And so it really felt like, we needed to enrich our whole understanding of this whole area. And the people who know most about it are the people who are struggling with infertility. It's become a refrain around here is that there's no more pro-life person than a couple struggling with infertility. There's nobody more pro-life than that. And they sort of suffer a pro-life culture that's too shallow, if that makes sense, right? And so not only did I feel like I wanted to reach out to those people who are struggling with infertility, but I also saw them as a resource. They have something to teach us. They have something to make known to us. They have something to contribute to the life of the church. And I want to open up a way to allow that contribution to be made. And and it just seems straightforward and easy. I had these friends. I could call Ann and like, what's it going to take to get you here? And what can we do and what's going to work? So we thought we would put on a retreat. We decided to do just a 1-day reflection at a parish. The most difficult thing, I think it's true in most dioceses, but it's certainly true in our diocese, is that anything new is really hard to do because nobody knows about it. I mean, everything is so set in like, well, we've never done that before. So they don't. So just getting people even aware that we're doing something at all is the biggest challenge. The actual day itself is easy to put on. You just buy some coffee and you get a room at a parish and a meeting hall somewhere, and you get incredible people to come in and share their stories. And so we did that last year. We did our day of reflection last year. It was an amazing, incredible experience. One thing that just kind of struck me about that day was we had about 12 or 15 women. It was we focused on women on the first one. It was a day of reflection for women struggling with infertility. We had 15 or so women that we were able to get there. And we're at this church in like a social hall kind of place, and people are having coffee and breakfasty stuff, and everyone's visiting. It's just like what you would expect to see in a social hall in a parish. Like everyone's being friendly, everyone's being nice, everyone is like, oh hi, getting to know you. Very, very light social endeavor. And then the Springs ladies kind of called everyone together. Okay, we're going to start. And I think it was Cassandra, and she said, infertility is just really hard. This is really difficult. And the waterworks right then, like people were crying, right? And it wasn't at all like people, we were like emotionally primed and worked up into a lather and all that kind of stuff that kind of happens on retreats. It was that this suffering was just a millimeter under the surface. And all you had to do is just touch it. And there it was. Just to be able to suffer that, to be allowed to suffer it and to suffer it together with other people who understood. And, with all the things that we covered and talked about, the overwhelming response was, I felt seen, I felt known, I felt understood. And it's like, that's exactly right, that there's a contribution that's being made into the life of the church just by suffering this thing, a really important one. And so that's how it started here. And then we're doing a weekend retreat at the Abbey Retreat Center on the North Shore in June. No, when are we doing it?
July.
Yes, July.
July. Yeah, so middle of July. We'll be doing that, and yeah, it's just been a really amazing thing. Now, just to kind of a little bit more about the background of why, we're all very familiar in Catholic diocesan ministry, family life ministry world with the procreative and unitive dimensions of the marital act, right? And fertility awareness and those kinds of topics, right? We're all super familiar with those things. And we almost exclusively think about them in terms of contraception and those kinds of things, like don't contracept, NFP or whatever. But a lot of people's experiences, whether they struggle with infertility or not, a lot of people's experiences with natural family planning is like it's not as easy or direct as what's been sold to them at marriage preparation. It's a challenge. And the truth is that the things that attract us to one another, the things that make us fall in love with each other in the first place, the things that pull us into intimate relationships in the first place, all the way at the beginning, is already about children. It's already about fruitfulness. It's like that's the reason why God puts sexual desire in our hearts in the first place, is to lead us reliably into the place where history gets to continue, right? And that's such a deep dimension, the unitive dimension that makes possible the fruitful dimension. And to understand that dynamic means understanding what it means to be attracted to each other and how attraction goes off the rails. And we do a lot of work with other areas like sexual integrity and pornography and all that stuff, and to understand what's going on with and helping men, say, with pornography issues. We can't do that if we don't understand deeply enough why we even have these attractions in the first place, and what does it mean when it goes off the rails. And so to understand the unity of those things more deeply, it seems just necessary. So we need to be close to people who are able to experience the whole human experience of love, fall in love with each other, form intimate relationships with the other, get married, and then at the end, sort of, in air quotes, suffer a failure or something like that. No wonder when at the end of on the end of that story, when the child doesn't come, there's doubts in the hearts of the husband and the wife about, is our marriage even valid? Is this even real? Maybe we should get married to somebody else. My body is hostile to my own vocation. My marriage doesn't function. My relationship to God is broken. And all of those layers of brokenness that people who struggle with fertility suffer. And all of that makes sense because of what it really means that the unitive and procreative dimensions kind of fit together. And the way forward isn't to throw up our hands and say, well, that's not a failure. That what God's trying to do is really the unitive dimension that makes possible fruitfulness. And one of the ways that fruitfulness occurs is children. But that's not the whole story. That the relationship between the man and the woman, the unity of the husband and the wife, is fruitful by virtue of the relationship itself. And that is good, and that is beautiful, and that's a worthy way to spend your life. And people who are, say, for example, struggling with pornography need to see that beauty. They need to know that marriage is worth the sacrifice necessary to move in that direction. And so if we can help people who are struggling with infertility understand and appreciate, embrace, and make known the beauty of the married life, then it becomes a light to all of the other areas of ministry that we try to do in our offices, all of the other things that we're trying to do. It makes it easier for us to explain the dignity of marriage to young couples who are getting engaged in the first place. this stuff's not even on their radar, or the people who are struggling other kinds of difficulties and failures and breakdowns in communication and all of the other areas are enlightened by being better at thinking about and understanding more deeply this area. To me, it's an important integrating influence, and it helps us not silo all of the different things that we do in marriage, family life, and see it as a whole one story. So that's to me what the real value there, and why it's necessary. It's not only, I don't want to repeat this, it's not only necessary because we want to reach out to those people who are suffering, but perhaps even more important than that is that they have a contribution to make to help us understand and help us to become better at all of the other areas of ministry that we're involved with. The more I can really see and understand and appreciate the sufferings of those who are struggling with infertility, the better I'll be when I'm talking to young couples who are getting married, or working someone through an annulment, or talking with someone who doing sexual integrity work, or grief ministry, or any of those other things. I'm a more wise, knowledgeable, competent, minister of the gospel. And so that's, to me, that's why it's indispensable. I mean, that's why everyone should do it. I mean, that's why diocese should be doing it, because it'll make you better diocesan directors of marriage and family life offices. It'll make you for better offices that do better work in all the different areas.
Chris, thank you so much for laying all of that out the way that you did, and especially for bringing it back around to the contribution that couples who are struggling with infertility can and should and need to be resources within the church, within the community, have a real contribution to make. This is something that we really want the people in our community to hear and to understand. And I think when it comes from someone like you who has some position of authority in the church, right? Within the diocesan structure, to say that, it's meaningful to us because we can very much feel like, where do we belong? We don't belong in the moms group. We don't belong in the young adult group anymore, perhaps, or all these different places, and we feel like we have nothing to contribute. Yeah, I just want our listeners and the people in this community to really hear that. And even if that's not maybe how things are structured right now in your own diocese, maybe that's not a message that you're hearing, it's the truth. And we're working little by little to get that message out there.
Yeah, I think we'll probably spend most of our time talking more about like what dioceses can do. But before we move on from that, the real appreciation, a lot of times it's like, oh, you are not able to have children. Well, that means that you're free to do some other good work of service. You can, adopt, say, although, have you ever thought about adoption? And, adoption's great, but oftentimes that's a struggle. Or, oh, you can work with the poor, or, oh, you can do some, your time, you have more time now and you're freed up, and blah 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 blah. And that almost always comes off as just like inadequate. Like, I think that families who struggling with infertility just know deep in their bones that that's not, I mean, it's true as far as it goes, right? It's true as far as it goes. And those are helpful things, like, get involved in the life of the church in the ways that, that you're able to now that you don't, I mean, yes, but it's not sufficient, right? It doesn't take away the suffering and the contribution. This is the deep, deep question, a deep insight that I think Springs has helped us to understand is the suffering itself is a contribution. The suffering, so that the fact that you are suffering this means that you are growing in awareness of the deep beauty and the necessity of marriage, family life, children, fecundity, all of those topics. That it's not just a biological sperm meets egg kind of sex ed talk from high school, that it's a much deeper truth. And so what you're suffering is the loss of a genuine good, and the suffering itself means a growing of a sense of that good. And that's precisely what's driving so much of what's so difficult in the culture that we are in right now. And so it does sometimes take the form of sort of a contemplative dimension. You're suffering something that no one else really sees, or no one else really knows, or no one else really, understands, and all of that. that doesn't mean that that suffering is a waste. I mean, you think about the monk in the cell who spends his life praying to the Lord and nobody sees him and nobody knows him and nobody, understands what he's doing or why he's doing it or why that's important. But it sustains the church. It holds the church up and it's incredibly important. And I think that there's a contemplation of the good that's going on that's causing that suffering. And so the fact that you're feeling that suffering isn't really a problem. It's not something that needs to be solved. I mean, that's one of the things we talk a lot about, the difficulties in ministries. Oftentimes we see somebody suffering and we try to rush in and take their cross away from them. But the cross bears fruit in unexpected, surprising ways. And, when you suffer something well, you find fruits that wouldn't have come out otherwise. And I think that is actually what happens when people engage in other ministries. They volunteer, they, take other people, they're kind of open to fruitfulness in new and different ways. But it's not the solution that solves the problem of their suffering. It's the fruit that comes out of that suffering. And so to give people permission to just suffer it, it's like, okay, it stinks. It's terrible. It's hard. It hurts. It's awful. And you don't have to do anything else than just suffer it and just let it bear its own fruit. It's just a matter of suffering it well. It's, not becoming dejected, not becoming, discouraged, not becoming bitter and resentful and cynical and all of those kinds of things, but, kind of marinating in the suffering of it well with other people in an encouraging way. It bears its own fruit. And we see that all the time. I mean, that's what Springs is, frankly. The whole project is that. Like, they didn't start off saying, "Oh, Anne said, oh, we're unable to have children. Let's start Springs." It's not what happened. It was just they were talking about it and thinking about it and bearing it and carrying it and suffering it. And then it bears fruit in something unexpected and something necessary and something good. And I think that everybody who struggles with infertility or any cross, frankly, for that matter, can walk that same path that Christ walks, and allow the cross to bear fruit. So, even if there aren't things going on in your diocese, there should be things going on in your diocese, and we can maybe work in the direction to do that. But nobody gets to take away the fruitfulness of your cross from you. Like, nobody, and nobody else can bear it than you. And it only bears the fruit that you can bear. And that's a worthy and noble and beautiful vocation in the church that should be embraced and not shunned. Maybe not pursued, maybe not desired, maybe not wanted, but embraced, And frankly, that's what marriage is like. I mean, if you had 10 kids, it'd be a ton of suffering right there. It's not be easy. I have kids. It's not easy. And a lot of it is just suffering, the suffering that needs to be suffered so that it bears fruit in the way that it's going to bear fruit. So just encourage you on all of you that are out there that are struggling with that. Don't feel like your sufferings are useless or wasted. They're not. They just aren't.
Man, that this whole conversation is so beautiful. I think helpful being in the position to, as a parishioner, as someone involved in the diocese, to hear this and to receive that and to know, like you said, to give permission to suffer, that it's okay. Not, like you said, it's not easy, probably not desired, but it's worthy in itself. That there's something beautiful that only I can, or my husband and I, our marriage can bring to the world that no one else can because of the particular cross we've been given. But I also think it's so valuable for diocesan leaders to see just the stage that you've laid out, that if you understand really what the church is teaching about the unitive and procreative aspects of marriage and the dignity of the human person, that all the areas that you serve, all of your ministries will flourish because of this correct understanding. That's not you don't limit it
That's right.
to a shallow understanding. And I really appreciate that.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It just makes you better at everything else. It makes
Right.
because everybody's bearing a cross and a cross that's uniquely theirs. Everybody's suffering. Nobody's got a life that's ideal, that's working. Well, maybe there's a few really lucky people where everything worked out. They went to school and they got their career and it's an easy job and they're making tons of money and they've got their 2.6 kids and they're coasting. And if you've ever met those people, they don't know anything. Like they don't know anything. Like it's like, they think, oh, life is just this, oh, when you have a problem, you just write a check and then it solves the problem and everything is easy and every problem is easy. I mean, and it's like, that's not how life really is. We're not designed to coast through our life. We have a saying here in the office, right? Is that the weights at the gym are heavy, right? The weights at the gym are heavy. Like the things in your life that resist your freedom of movement are the very things that are making you stronger. You don't go to the gym and just do whatever you want. You're doing things that there are things there that are trying to keep you from doing what you want. That's the weights at the gym are heavy. But if you lift them, you engage that capacity to grow. And that's true in every single area. And so, yeah, it needs to be okay to be suffering. And you need to not be afraid of it being suffering. You have to give it permission to suck in order for it to have the fruitful effect. And I think, especially for men, that's especially an important message, that it's not supposed to be easy. It's and in fact, you'll by in a forthright and direct way facing that, you'll grow. And that's necessary in every single area. And I think, to go into the diocesan ministry, to be effective at diocesan ministry, I mean, one of the things that this just kind of a universal truth, as far as I can tell, is that people maybe aspire to be the director of an office or something, or they want to be the guy in control or in charge, or they think if I were the bishop, I would XYZ. And how come the vicar general doesn't ABC and, deal with this issue? And everybody has an opinion about what needs to happen and what should happen and why are things a problem because those guys aren't willing to do the thing that's obvious that needs to be done. And then you get into the situation and you realize, okay, the situations are way bigger, way more complicated, and your power to actually do something about it is way smaller than you think. Like your influence is we're just a little whispering voice in the cacophony of the culture that we're in. And we don't have, like, everyone thinks there's like all of this resource and power and money and whatever. It doesn't exist. It's not actually there. And so trying to figure out how to do the best you can with the resources you have, I think needs to take the shape of inviting more people to contribute with what it is that they have to contribute and opening up space and making room for people to contribute to the life of the church in the way that they're being called to be, and not me from the top who knows more than everybody else, who's better trained than everybody else, who has this whiz bang program, and I'm going to like fix the church by fiat from the top down, just saying from now on we're going to do this program. It ends up adopting more responsibility than can be carried by the office, by dictating everyone else's spiritual life or dictating the ministries at parishes or dictating to people what they should or shouldn't do or what they can or can't do or what are they required to do. It needs to be a version of like, look, the church needs you to contribute to the life of the church in the way that makes sense for you. And I don't need to overly, in an overbearing way, get involved with that. I can't. Like, I can only be in one place. And the Archdiocese of New Orleans is huge. There's stuff going on everywhere. And it's all kind of different people in all different kinds of places. And, there's not a one size fits all solution to the problems. So, what can we do? Well, we can make clearer the path, that vocational path. Like what we just said about the suffering of infertility contributes and needs to be allowed to contribute. And, the people who are suffering it need to give themselves permission to suffer it and know that it bears its own fruit. And the people who are ministering to them, or the ministers, the diocesan officials, the priests, the deacons, the marriage and family life coordinator ministries, the DREs and, youth ministers, all of those people, the, CCD, parish school or religion teachers, like all of those people need to have a profound respect for that, and to, when they see it, encourage it instead of like trying to like manipulate it and control it and point it in the direction it's supposed to go. We're not ever going to be effective by trying to control everything. It's just not going to happen because we need literally thousands of people contributing to move the needle. One guy in an office can't do it. So making that more clear is something that we can do, you know, holding up,
Mhm.
you know, Springs in the Desert isn't a program. It's not a program. There's no like textbook. There's no like work through this, these you fill out this, form, and at the end you'll go through a process and you'll be able to, in some technical way, like heal from whatever. It's like, no, that's not what Springs does. That's not the insight that Spring brings. It's allowing people to deepen their awareness of the sufferings that they're carrying and to carry those sufferings well and fruitfully, without denying them, without telling people what's okay and what's not okay, all of that. And I think that's a model for what we need to be doing because it's the only way. I think the family life office, in most dioceses maybe is 2% of the diocesan budget or something. Like the Archdiocese of New Orleans is a really big diocese, a very big diocese. And my office is 2.5 people. Me, an administrative assistant who answers the phones and kind of manages the office, and I have half of an associate director. That's it. That's all there is, And so I can't be in 120 parishes telling them what to do. Like that's just never going to happen. That's not, and it's not appropriate. If I came into a parish from the diocese, I came into the parish to try to tell them what to do. They're like, they're not interested in tyrants either. They're not interested in people telling them what to do all the time. But if I'm helping them be more successful in what they're trying to do in their parishes, then they're going to be like, okay, they're going to welcome, like, yeah, we need Spring. Yeah, I know, Father, you go to a father and goes, I know that there are women and couples that are struggling with infertility who are really struggling. Okay, here's something that's going to actually move the needle for those people. Okay, I can get on board with that. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a task.
Yeah, I really love how you laid that out because I think that it brings to light that it's not just diocesan leaders' job to make this happen, but it's also the parishioners' job
Yeah,
to partner together
yeah,
and to recognize that their cross is worthy and to allow fruitfulness to come from that
yeah.
cross. And that's going to look different. I live in North Dakota and our parishes, we've got tiny rural parishes that seem so small, to some of these larger dioceses that
Mhm.
are around the nation. And so there might be something different that works in
Sure.
my parish or my diocese than does the Diocese of New Orleans, but if we keep that in mind, if we keep this worthiness of the cross and the real beauty of the vocation of marriage at the forefront, that it will bring fruit in whatever way is necessary in the parish and the diocesan.
Yeah, one thing that I've become more aware of that maybe people could, to help people, because I do think that the grassroots direction, like there's nothing stopping anybody listening, no matter what's going on in their diocese or what's going on in their parish or how clueless their pastor is or whatever. There's nothing stopping having someone over for dinner or going to get coffee with somebody. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. There's nothing stopping you from listening to someone else's suffering and encouraging them. Like you can do that. Like you can, and that's a Springs in the Desert, discussion group. Is That's it. That's all it is. It's just people being friends, And one thing that I think a lot of people who are down, just regular parishioners, they have too high of expectation of the capacity of, say, the pastor or the diocese or whatever. But the truth is just those guys are just guys. They're just people. Like your pastor is just a guy. And people can only really keep track of about 150 relationships in their circle. They just can't, like their brains can't handle more than that. And there are very few parishes that are smaller than that. So Father doesn't know. Like he doesn't know. He just doesn't know. Like he knows less than you think. And it's not because he's an idiot or because he doesn't care or because or anything, or not well formed or anything. That's not why. It's just that it's just too big a task to be that involved in everyone's life. And so he needs your help. And he might need your help by you going to his office and talking to him about it. But he also could use your help by go have coffee with someone who needs coffee. Like go visit somebody who needs to be visited and share your sufferings with somebody else, and establish friendships with them. And you contribute to the life of the parish that way. I mean, a parish can turn around by parishioners doing that. And it doesn't really matter who the pastor is if parishioners are doing that.
Yeah, that is so right, and a really great practical piece of advice that ask that the person that you're sitting next to in the pew that you say hello to every Sunday morning for the last year and a half. And then you've gotten to know them. Ask them, yeah, for coffee,
Yeah.
or ask them to, start forming friendships like yours and Anne's,
Yeah.
became, and it'll bring fruit, and you'll get to understand each other's crosses, whatever it is that you're carrying, and then you can serve each other better, in the parish level, and then who knows what that could bring at the diocesan level. If there are more workers in the vineyard, then diocesan leaders can really
Yeah.
they can do more, and they can provide more,
Yeah.
and serve more people. And
Exactly right.
I'm just so encouraged by this conversation. I've really, I have ideas in my mind, and just encouragement that it is possible to do more, and to serve more and expand our notions around infertility at the parish and diocesan level. And listeners, I hope that you're encouraged too, and that you might ask someone for coffee, and we can just build up the body of Christ.
And come on our retreat. Come to New Orleans and
Yes.
come on our retreat.
Yes, come to retreat.
Come
Yes.
visit us. Come meet me and Ann and everybody, and come. It would be great to have you here.
Yes, I echo that. I know last year, I think for that Day of Recollection, there were a few people who flew quite a ways to attend that, and I know we already have some people who have plane tickets booked for this year. So yes, please come. If you can't make it to this one, then watch our website to make it to the next one. We're so incredibly grateful to have you here, listeners, and it was so good to talk to you, Chris. And we're praying for all of you diocesan leaders. Listeners, if you are friends with your diocesan leader, feel free to send them this episode to give them some ideas and some encouragement and support to continue building up the body of Christ at the diocesan level. It is an honor to walk with you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.